A young, ambitious farmer storms out of his house at dawn, only to find an old bent man, clothes worn thin, back curved with age, quietly planting trees along the edge of his property. Caleb, a man who values time and efficiency above all else, watches in disbelief. Why would someone who can barely stand, someone with nothing, choose to spend his last remaining years planting trees he will never live to see grow? What happens next, between a frustrated young farmer and an old man planting hope one seed at a time, will change a life forever. On the far dusty outskirts of a quiet farming village lived a man who most people barely noticed anymore. His real name was Bartholomew, but no one had called him that in decades. To the villagers, he was simply Old Bart. His back had begun to fold like an old book left too long in the sun. His hands, scarred, calloused, shaped by decades of work, looked like roots themselves, strong, twisted but tired. His steps were small, careful, each one a negotiation between determination and pain. Yet every morning while roosters still slept, while the mist still clung to the earth, Bart rose from his quiet, creaking home. Not to rest. Not to pray. Not to reminisce. But to work. He packed a rough brown sack with hundreds of tiny seedlings, fruit trees of every kind, mango, guava, breadfruit, tamarind, jackfruit. Trees that would one day bear food for families. Long after Bart's name would be forgotten. Then with slow, deliberate steps, he walked. Farm to farm. Border to border. Empty land to empty land. He dug small holes. Placed seedlings gently like infants. Covered them with soil. And whispered something only the earth could hear. Every single day. People noticed him, of course, but they didn't understand him. The butcher shook his head whenever Bart passed by. That old man's out of his mind, he'd mutter. Mothers pulling water from the well whispered, such a lonely life, maybe this is how he keeps himself company. Teenagers laughed as they rode by, planting trees for ghosts, old man? You won't be around to see anything grow. But Bart never responded. Not with words. His answer was always the same, a soft, quiet smile, and another seedling placed into the waiting earth. Rain or heat, sickness or exhaustion, Bart never missed a day. It didn't matter to him if people mocked him or misunderstood him. Because Bart lived by a lesson learned long ago. A lesson planted into him by someone who once saved his life. But he never shared this story. Not with anyone. While Old Bart lived slowly, quietly, Caleb lived fast. Caleb was everything the old man was not. Strong shoulders. Hands quick and steady. Eyes sharp, determined. A man who believed in progress, visible progress. Caleb was known in the village as the farmer who wanted more. He worked from before sunrise to long after sunset, pushing himself, pushing his land, pushing his future. His fields were neat, controlled, efficient. His plans were bigger than his father's, bigger than his grandfather's, bigger than this small village could imagine. He dreamed of expanding, buying more land, building better storage barns, becoming the largest food producer in the entire region. But dreams require time. And time was the one thing Caleb protected fiercely. So on the morning our story truly begins, when Caleb stepped outside and found the old man digging holes at the border of his land, uninvited, he felt something boiling inside him. Irritation. Suspicion. Annoyance. Who gave this old man permission to plant anything on his farm? Caleb's jaw tightened as he watched Bart slowly lower another seedling into the soil. Enough was enough. Caleb marched across the field, boots hammering the earth, each step fueled by frustration. "Hey," he shouted. "Old man. What do you think you're doing?" Bart paused mid-motion. He looked up, breathing heavily, wiping sweat from his forehead. He didn't speak. "I didn't ask for this," Caleb continued. "I don't need you planting trees on my land. Especially trees that won't grow for decades. You'll be long gone before they bear anything. So what's the point?" His words were sharper than he intended. But once spoken, they hung between them like a blade. Bart's eyes, soft, tired, wise, didn't show anger. Instead, he seemed to be studying Caleb. Not judging him. Just trying to understand the storm inside him. For years, Bart had avoided explaining himself. He planted quietly. He lived quietly. He asked for nothing. But Caleb's question, why? Why keep planting trees you'll never live to enjoy? That question pierced through Bart's silence in a way no one else's ever had. Maybe it was the sincerity beneath the anger. Maybe it was the familiarity. Caleb carried a shadow in his expression that reminded Bart of someone he once knew. Slowly, Bart stood upright, using his shovel as a brace. "Come with me," he said softly. Caleb blinked. "What? Where?" Bart pointed toward a large, flourishing mango tree near the farmhouse. The one Caleb had eaten from since he was a child. The one his family relied on every drought season. "Just follow me," Bart repeated. Something in his voice, fragile yet steady, disarmed Caleb's irritation, if only for a moment. With a reluctant sigh, Caleb walked alongside him. When they reached the massive mango tree, Bart stopped and gently placed his palm on its trunk. "Do you enjoy the fruit from this tree?" Bart asked. Caleb frowned. "Of course. My family has lived off this tree for decades." Bart nodded slowly. "Your grandfather planted it," he said, "when he was just a boy." Caleb's eyebrows shot up. "No, that can't be right. My father never mentioned." Bart continued, voice trembling. "He planted it when the village went through a terrible famine. Food was scarce. No one knew if we'd survive the year. I was only a teenager then. I had nothing to eat. No land. No family left." He swallowed hard. "Your grandfather saw me struggling. Even though he had little, he shared what he had. And then he planted this tree," he said. Bart's voice broke, just for a moment. "I may never eat from it, but someone will." Caleb's breath caught in his throat. "He planted it for me," Bart whispered. "And for you." Caleb felt the earth shift beneath him. The tree he had always taken for granted, the tree he had eaten from, the tree that had fed them through drought after. It wasn't just a tree. It was a gift. A legacy. A promise. Bart wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Your grandfather's kindness kept me alive when I had nothing," he said. "So now, I plant for those who come after me. Just as he planted for you." The world seemed to stand still. Caleb felt heat rising behind his eyes. But he blinked quickly, unwilling to show weakness. Suddenly, the old man's daily ritual didn't look pointless. It looked profound. Bart wasn't planting trees. He was planting gratitude. Planting memory. Planting hope. And Caleb, so focused on productivity, efficiency, progress, felt something shift inside him. Something he hadn't felt in years. Humility. Before we continue with this incredible journey, I spent countless hours crafting this story to bring you something truly meaningful. If stories like this touch your heart and you want to see more acts of kindness that restore faith in humanity, please subscribe and hit the notification bell. It means the world to me, and it helps these important stories reach others who need to hear them. Now, let's see what happens next. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that completely changed your perspective? Share your story in the comments below. I'd love to read it. Caleb stood beneath the giant mango tree, his chest rising and falling as Bart's words echoed in his mind. The morning sun pushed through the clouds, illuminating the old man's face, lined with age, carved with years of work, but shining now with something else. Gratitude. Memory. Love for a friend long gone. For the first time in his life, Caleb didn't know what to say. Bart seemed to sense this. He gave the mango tree one final tap, almost like thanking an old friend, and then turned back toward the row of tiny seedlings waiting to be planted. He expected Caleb to leave. People usually did. No one stuck around after hearing his stories. Most didn't even care enough to listen. But this time, Caleb followed him. "Wait," he said quietly. "You knew my grandfather well?" Bart nodded. "He was the kindest man I ever met. He believed in planting forward, giving without expecting anything in return." Caleb swallowed hard. That didn't sound like the version of his grandfather he grew up hearing. His father always described him as strict, focused, hard-working, never kindest man I ever met. It made Caleb question how much he truly knew about his own family's past. Bart knelt beside the next seedling, lowering himself slowly and painfully. His knees cracked. His breath shook. But his hands, those tough root-like hands, remained steady. Caleb watched as Bart cupped the tiny plant in his palms. "You treat it like it's alive," Caleb murmured. Bart smiled gently. It is alive. And one day, this little thing might feed people long after I'm gone. The sincerity in the old man's voice stirred something in Caleb. And then, for the first time in years, he crouched down beside another human being, not to criticize, not to hurry them, but to understand. What do you need? Caleb said. Bart blinked. Need to plant the next one. How can I help? A slow, trembling smile spread across Bart's face, a smile that carried decades of unspoken loneliness. You don't need to, Bart started. I want to, Caleb interrupted. And the two men, one strong and young, the other fragile and old, began digging side by side. As they worked, Caleb began noticing things he had never taken the time to observe. Bart placed each seedling with careful precision, turning it to face the direction that gave it the best chance of surviving. He whispered blessings, soft, almost musical, for each tree. He worked slowly, but with intention, as if planting wasn't labor, but devotion. Caleb was sweating within minutes. Bart, despite moving slower, continued steadily, like a clock that refused to stop ticking. You do this every day? Caleb asked, wiping his brow. Every day I still have breath, Bart replied, patting the soil over a newly planted tree. But, doesn't it hurt? Don't you get tired? Bart chuckled softly. Of course. But I don't plant because it's easy. I plant because someone once chose to help me when I had nothing. This is how I honor that. Caleb felt a quiet, heavy admiration settling over him. This old man, fragile, unnoticed, overlooked, had more purpose than most people ever touched in a lifetime. And it humbled him. When they finished planting the row, Bart tried to stand up. He couldn't. His back seized. His knees buckled. He grabbed the handle of his shovel, wincing sharply. Easy, Caleb said, grabbing Bart's arm. Bart shook his head stubbornly. I'm fine. Just old bones, that's all. But when he tried again, his leg nearly gave out. Without thinking, Caleb stepped behind him, placing his arms under Bart's shoulders. Here, Caleb said gently. Lean on me. Bart froze, shocked. It had been a long time since anyone had offered him help without pity in their voice. Even longer since anyone had touched him with genuine care. Thank you, Bart whispered, barely audible. Caleb helped him stand. He didn't drop him. He didn't rush him. He didn't treat him like a burden. He supported him. They stayed like that for a moment, two men connected not by blood, not by obligation, but by a shared legacy rooted in an old mango tree. When Bart steadied himself, Caleb spoke. Let me walk you home. Bart hesitated. I don't want to trouble you. You're not, Caleb said firmly. You helped my family long before I ever existed. The least I can do is return the favor. Bart looked down at the freshly planted row of seedlings. Then at Caleb. And a small tear escaped the corner of his eye. He nodded. All right, he whispered. Thank you. The walk to Bart's home was slow but meaningful. They passed the fields. The dirt paths. The old broken fences. Villagers taking notice, surprised to see Caleb, the hard-working, no-nonsense farmer, patiently walking beside the most overlooked man in town. Your grandfather used to walk this same path with me, Bart said quietly. Back then, I was the strong one. He told me, one day, you'll be walking this path without me. When that time comes, plant something for the people who come next. Caleb listened, heart heavy with emotion he didn't expect. Did he ever tell you why? Caleb asked. Bart smiled. He said the world only grows better when we choose to leave things behind that are bigger than ourselves. Caleb looked at the seedlings sticking out of Bart's sack. Suddenly, they didn't look like plants. They looked like promises. Bart's home was small, practically leaning to one side. The paint had faded to a dull gray. The door creaked loudly when Caleb pushed it open. Inside, everything was simple. A wooden table with only one chair. A bed covered with a thin handmade quilt. A shelf filled with jars of collected seeds. And walls decorated not with pictures or certificates, but with drawings made by village children Bart had helped over the years. You live alone? Caleb asked quietly. Bart nodded. Always have. Caleb remembered what villagers whispered. He plants because he's lonely. He plants because he has no family. He plants to feel useful. But looking around the tiny home, Caleb understood. Bart didn't plant because he was lonely. He planted because he refused to leave the world emptier than he found it. "Sit," Caleb said gently, pulling the chair out for Bart. "Let me make you some tea." Bart chuckled. "You don't know how to make tea." Caleb shrugged. "Then you can teach me." For the first time in years, Bart laughed, a real laugh, light and warm and unexpected. And as Caleb prepared the tea poorly, Bart watched with quiet amusement. When Caleb finally handed him the cup, too hot, slightly bitter, but made with genuine care, Bart held it with both hands. "Thank you," he said softly. "Not just for the tea. For the walk. For the respect. For listening." Caleb nodded. "Thank you for planting for me." As Bart sipped his tea, he began sharing stories he had never told anyone. Stories of sleeping in barns when he was a teenager. Of losing his parents too young. Of Caleb's grandfather giving him the first full meal he'd eaten in days. Of how that single act of kindness shaped his entire life. "Kindness," Bart said, staring at the steam rising from his cup, "is the only thing that grows when you give it away." Caleb let the words sink in. He realized then that hidden beneath Bart's quiet, humble exterior was a heart overflowing with a lifetime of gratitude, and a mission to pass that gratitude on. And Caleb, for the first time, felt honored to be a part of it. The days that followed felt different for Caleb. Before, his routine had been rigid: wake up, work the fields, push himself, plan his future. Every hour of his day centered around productivity and efficiency. But now, he found himself waking up early not just to tend to his crops, but to search the horizon for a familiar bent silhouette. And every morning, he found Old Bart already walking down the dirt path, sack of seedlings slung over his shoulder like a soldier carrying out a mission. But this time, Bart wasn't walking alone. Because Caleb started showing up beside him. Not always talking. Not always asking questions. Sometimes just walking silently, matching his pace with the old man's slower steps. At first, Bart tried to protest. "You have your own work to do," he'd grumble. Caleb would smile softly. "And I'm doing it. Helping you is part of it now." Day after day, the quiet companionship grew. They planted rows of guava trees along an abandoned field. Tamarind trees near the village schoolyard. Breadfruit trees behind the houses of struggling families. And with every seedling placed in the ground, Caleb found himself changing. The world felt slower, fuller, more meaningful. He began asking questions he had never asked anyone. "Bart, when did you start planting like this? What keeps you going when no one notices? Do you ever feel tired of giving so much?" Bart answered each one with patience, wisdom, and a tenderness Caleb didn't expect. "No, boy, giving doesn't drain you. It fills you." One evening, after a long day planting on the far side of the village, Caleb returned home later than usual. His mother was waiting on the porch, arms crossed. "You've been spending a lot of time with that old man," she said. "His name is Bart," Caleb replied. She sighed. "People talk, Caleb. They think you're wasting your time. Some even think Bart is, well, not all there." Caleb flinched at the remark. He had once thought the same thing. But now? Now he knew better. "He's not crazy," Caleb said. "He's the wisest man I've ever met." His mother softened, but concern still lingered in her eyes. "Just be careful," she warned. "People don't always understand kindness. Or those who choose to give more than they receive." Caleb nodded, though her words stayed with him longer than he wanted. As the days passed and Bart and Caleb planted more trees together, villagers began talking. Some were supportive. "He's helping make the land beautiful. Those trees will feed our children one day. Old Bart finally has someone looking out for him." But others were less kind. "Caleb's wasting time on an old fool. He should focus on expanding his farm, not babysitting. Bart won't be around long enough for any of this to matter." Caleb tried to ignore the comments, but they stung. He had always been the hard-working one, the ambitious one, the dependable one. Now people acted like he was throwing away his future. One afternoon, as he and Bart knelt planting a line of jackfruit trees along the edge of a neighbor's land, a local farmer named Raymond approached them. Raymond was known for his blunt tongue and inflated pride. "Caleb," he said loudly, "didn't expect to find you out here in the dirt with a man who barely knows what year it is." Caleb froze. Bart lowered his gaze, pretending not to hear. Raymond continued, "You've got a good head on your shoulders. Don't waste your time on this nonsense. Trees take decades to grow. There's no profit here." Caleb stood slowly, fists tightening at his sides. "There are things more important than profit," he said quietly. Raymond scoffed. "Like what?" "Fairy tales and old men's stories." Caleb stepped forward, his voice steady but sharp. "Like legacy. Like gratitude. Like doing something that outlives you." Raymond muttered something under his breath and walked away. Caleb turned back to Bart, who looked up at him with glistening eyes. "You didn't have to defend me," Bart whispered. Caleb shook his head. "Yes, I did." Over the weeks, Bart began sharing things he had kept hidden for decades. He talked about the famine that took his parents, about the lonely years that followed, about nights he slept in barns or under trees he hoped would one day shelter someone else. But one story hit Caleb harder than all the others. "Your grandfather didn't just plant that mango tree," Bart said. "He planted dozens. Everywhere he went. He never saw most of them grow, but he believed in the future. He believed someone, not him, would benefit." Caleb blinked. "My father never told me any of this." "Your father was young when he died," Bart reminded him. "Some stories never got passed down. But you were meant to hear them." Caleb swallowed hard. "Bart, why tell me now?" Bart smiled softly. "Because legacy chooses its carriers. And I think you were chosen long before you were ever born." The words washed over Caleb like warm rain, comforting, cleansing, and painful all at once. Then, the turning point arrived. And it came in the form of a government notice nailed to a wooden post at the edge of the village. The land Bart had been planting on, some of it quietly for years, was being evaluated for potential commercial development. Factories, storage units, warehouses, trees, especially immature ones, were considered obstacles. Caleb tore the notice off and rushed to find Bart. He found him sitting on the ground by a row of tiny saplings, wiping sweat from his brow. "Bart," Caleb said, breathless, "they're planning to clear this land." Bart didn't flinch, didn't gasp. He simply closed his eyes for a long moment. "I knew this day would come," he said quietly. "You knew?" Caleb asked. "Developers have been looking at this land for years," Bart murmured. "People see empty space and think of money. Not life. Not future." Caleb paced angrily. "We can fight this." Bart shook his head. "No. I'm just an old man. I have no power here." "You're wrong," Caleb snapped. "You have me. And I'm not letting your life's work get bulldozed." Bart looked up at him, hope flickering but fragile. "And what if fighting means losing your reputation? Your connections? Your time? People already question why you help me." Caleb knelt beside him, gripping Bart's hands. "I don't care what they think. I'm not letting them erase everything you've built." Bart looked down, shaken by the loyalty he never expected from anyone, not at his age, not with his past. "Caleb," he whispered, "I don't deserve this." "Yes," Caleb said firmly, "you do. More than anyone I've ever met." In the days that followed, Caleb fought relentlessly. He spoke to the village council, filed petitions, met with property assessors, began rallying supportive villagers. But it was exhausting, slow, frustrating. Some nights, Caleb returned home feeling defeated. One evening, he found Bart sitting outside his home, looking smaller than ever. "Caleb, maybe it's time to let it go," Bart said softly. "I'm old. My time is almost up. Maybe the trees weren't meant to last." Caleb sat beside him. "No," he whispered. "They were meant to last. And so is the kindness behind them." Bart's voice cracked. "I don't want you to suffer because of me." Caleb looked at him with fierce sincerity. "I'm not suffering, Bart. I'm learning what matters." A long silence settled between them, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze. It was the sound of something fragile but powerful. A bond tested, but unbroken. Have you ever had to overcome obstacles to help someone you cared about? Share your experience below. Your story might inspire someone else. Caleb stood there, fists clenched at his sides, staring at the ridge of his land where the surveyors had placed bright orange stakes like scars across the earth. Bart watched him quietly, leaning slightly on his shovel for balance. The old man's eyes were soft, but behind them was a lifetime of wisdom and pain. Caleb's jaw tightened. "Bart," he whispered, "they're taking everything. The new owner is fencing half the ridge. Said the land records got updated. Said I can't prove the boundary line. Said if I don't like it, I can fight it in court, knowing I can't afford that." He kicked the dry soil in frustration. "It's not fair." Bart took a slow step toward him. "Fair," he repeated gently. "Son, very little in this world is fair. But everything worth keeping requires a fight." Caleb swallowed hard. "It's my land," he murmured. "My father worked this soil until his hands bled. My grandfather died believing this farm would stay in our family. And now it's slipping through my fingers." Bart put a hand on Caleb's shoulder, frail, trembling but steady. "My boy," he said softly, "then fight." Caleb looked at him, confused. "How? I don't have money. I don't have lawyers. I don't have—" Bart raised a hand. "You have something better." A long silence. The breeze rustled the leaves of the young saplings Bart had planted months ago, now taller, stronger reaching. "What do I have?" Caleb asked. Bart smiled faintly. "You have a reason." Caleb didn't sleep that night. He sat at the kitchen table with a stack of old deeds, dusty records, faded maps, and letters his grandfather had written decades earlier. He pored over every page, every scribbled note, every sketch of where boundary stones used to be before storms and time buried them. By morning, the table was covered in evidence. When Bart arrived the next dawn with his sack of seedlings, he saw the fire back in Caleb's eyes. "You ready?" the old man asked. Caleb nodded. "More than ready." The next days were a war, not with fists or swords, but with persistence. Caleb drove to the county land office every morning at sunrise. He waited in lines that seemed endless. He filled out forms no one explained. He spoke with clerks who barely made eye contact. But he didn't stop. Every time he returned home exhausted, Bart was waiting, watering the new saplings, mending a broken fence, or simply sitting on the porch. "How'd it go today?" Bart would ask. "Not good," Caleb would answer. And Bart would always say the same thing. "Then we try again tomorrow." Word spread through the village. At first, people were skeptical. Land disputes never end well. Caleb doesn't stand a chance. The buyer has money, influence. But something about the fight stirred them. Maybe it was Caleb's determination. Maybe it was Bart's quiet loyalty. Maybe it was the memory of a time when neighbors helped neighbors without being asked. One by one, people started showing up. Mrs. Alder brought lunch one day. Jonah, the retired surveyor, dug out old maps. A young law student home for the summer offered free help. Even the mayor paid a visit, not to make promises, but to say, "I'm keeping an eye on the situation." The fight stopped being Caleb's alone. It became everyone's fight. 3 weeks in, the turning point came. Jonah, the retired surveyor with shaky hands but a sharp mind, stood beside Caleb in a field at sunset. "I think we can prove it," he said. "Your grandfather used old stone markers. They might still be here, deep underground." Caleb blinked. "If we find them, it'll be undeniable," Jonah finished. They dug for hours. Shovel after shovel. Dirt flying, sweat dripping, hope thinning. Until, clunk. The sound echoed like a heartbeat. They knelt. There, beneath a foot of packed soil, was a stone, angled, weathered, carved with markings only an old surveyor would recognize. Jonah sat back, breath trembling. "This is it," he whispered. "This is your boundary." Caleb let out a shaky laugh, half sob, half relief. Bart smiled from a few feet away, tears silently streaming down his cheeks. The hearing room smelled of old wood and dust. The land buyer and his lawyers sat with smug confidence. The officials looked tired, indifferent. Then Caleb entered, with Bart beside him, Jonah behind him, the the young law student carrying boxes of evidence, and half the village filling every seat along the wall. When Caleb presented the uncovered boundary stone, the room went silent. When Jonah validated it, the buyer's smirk faded. When the county clerk confirmed the original survey, Caleb saw something in her face he hadn't seen before. Respect. It took 30 minutes for the officials to decide. But the moment the verdict came, everything froze. The disputed land belongs to the Caleb family, the chairperson said. The boundaries were altered improperly. The original markers stand. The land is legally restored. For a moment, Caleb couldn't breathe. Then Bart reached over and held his hand. Told you, the old man whispered, voice soft but proud. Everything worth keeping requires a fight. Caleb laughed, choked, emotional, overwhelmed. He hugged Bart, burying his face in the old man's shoulder. Thank you, Caleb whispered. I couldn't have done it without you. Bart shook his head gently. No, son. You fought for what was yours. I just planted a few trees along the way. Weeks later, on a morning glowing with golden light, Caleb walked out to the ridge where the boundary stone had been uncovered. Bart stood there, his sack of seedlings at his feet, looking out over acres of land saved by courage, community, and persistence. Caleb stepped beside him. What are you planting today? He asked quietly. Bart smiled. Something for someone who'll need it one day. Caleb nodded. Then slowly, he reached into the sack, lifted a seedling, and dug his first hole beside Bart. It was small, simple, almost insignificant. But it wasn't. It was a beginning, a legacy, a passing of the torch. And as the sun rose behind them, two figures, one old, one young, knelt side by side, planting hope into the soil of a land reclaimed by faith, by fight, and by love. The years moved gently over the village, like wind shaping the edges of old stones. The land dispute was long resolved, the fields were thriving again, and life flowed with a peace Caleb hadn't felt since boyhood. But none of it, not a single moment, was the same as before Bart entered his life. Because Bart changed everything. Before Bart, Caleb worked hard, but he worked alone. He lived for the next task, the next harvest, the next challenge. He didn't see the small things. He didn't understand legacy. He didn't look beyond his own lifetime. But Bart, quiet, patient, steady Bart, planted more than trees. He planted perspective. He planted gratitude. He planted humility. He planted vision. Caleb's entire mindset shifted. Where he once saw immediate gain, Bart taught him to see future impact. Where he once measured life by how much he could accomplish, Bart showed him a life measured by how much good he could leave behind. Where he once saw an old man wandering with a sack of seedlings, he now saw a man carrying a lifetime of purpose. Caleb often found himself repeating Bart's words without even realizing it. Everything worth keeping requires a fight. We plant for others, not ourselves. Kindness outlives the one who gives it. The people noticed the change in Caleb. He became patient, gentler, more generous, more thoughtful, more like Bart. The village would say, Caleb is growing into Old Bart. He would smile whenever he heard it, because it was the greatest compliment he could imagine. As the saplings around the village grew taller, Bart grew smaller. His steps slower. His breath shorter. Caleb visited him every evening. They talked about the land, the weather, the trees, but often, they just sat in silence, companions who didn't need words to feel connected. One cold morning, as Caleb arrived with a basket of fresh bread, he found Bart sitting peacefully on his porch chair, eyes closed, hands folded, face soft and calm. And Caleb knew. The old man had planted his last seed. Caleb fell to his knees beside him, tears streaming, gripping Bart's hand, the same hand that once guided his, steadying his anger, shaping his heart. Thank you, Caleb whispered through trembling breaths. Thank you for everything. The village mourned him like they had lost a hero. Because they had. The first summer after Bart's passing was unusually harsh. Rain came late. Crops struggled. Food grew scarce. But then, something miraculous happened. The oldest of Bart's trees, the ones he planted decades earlier on abandoned edges, forgotten corners, and hard dry places, began to bear fruit. Huge, golden, abundant fruit. Fruit that fed the village when fields could not. Fruit that saved families from hunger. Fruit that fed the children who played beneath the branches of trees they never knew were planted for them. It was then that the villagers understood the depth of Bart's wisdom. He hadn't been planting trees. He had been planting survival. Planting security. Planting love. Planting future. Bart saved a village, after he was gone. And every new generation grew up learning. When you eat from these trees, you are tasting Bart's kindness. On the anniversary of Bart's passing, Caleb walked to the hill where Bart had planted his final seedling. It was taller now, its green leaves shimmering in the warm light. Caleb placed his hand on the young trunk. "Old friend," he murmured, "I understand now. And I'll keep planting, for as long as I live." From that day on, Caleb made it his mission to finish the work Bart had started. He planted hundreds of trees. Some on his land. Most on the land that wasn't his. And whenever someone asked him why, he would smile, softly, knowingly. "Because someone planted for me." This story reminds us of a truth we often forget. Small actions change lives. Quiet kindness transforms generations. And love, when planted faithfully, never dies. Bart didn't leave behind wealth, or fame, or possessions. He left shade. He left nourishment. He left inspiration. He left a better man in Caleb. He left a better village. And you can do the same. If this story touched your heart, please like this video. It helps this message reach more people. If you want more stories that restore hope and celebrate real, human kindness, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. Your support means the world to me. Now, one last question for you. What small seed will you plant this week? What simple action, just one, can you take to make life better for someone else? Share it in the comments below. You never know how far your seed might grow. And remember, you have the power to change someone's world, even long after you're gone.